Hey guys, tonight we drift back to the myth-soaked world of ancient Greece, where golden gods ride chariots across the sky, snakes guard secret springs, and a radiant sun god gradually becomes distracted by some very charming birds. Yep, this is the tale of how Apollo, mighty slayer of monsters and master of prophecy, more or less invents birdwatching by accident. You're standing barefoot on a rocky slope outside Delphi, and the heat clings to your skin like a velvet cloak. There's incense in the air, curling up from shrines and lazy torches, and somewhere, just out of sight, a group of pilgrims is chanting something that sounds vaguely threatening in Dorian Greek. You're here to follow Apollo, but don't worry, he won't notice you. He's far too busy making his dramatic entrance. You blink as golden light floods the mountainside, and there he is, tall, shining, confident, absolutely not checking his reflection in his own bow. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from, say, Brisbane at 2:14 a.m. or Saskatchewan at a breezy 9:45 p.m., drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Apollo is technically on a mission right now. He's just dealt with a rather inconvenient gig called killing the giant python that lived under the temple of Gaia. That part's over, and he's supposed to be sanctifying Delphi as his new center of worship, his ultimate hangout spot for prophecy and pan flute recitals. But as he strides down the mountain, laurel crowns slightly askew, something odd catches his attention. A cluster of birds wheeling in a spiral above the cliff edge. Not eagles, which would be suitably majestic, but small birds. Swifts maybe, or rock doves. One of them tilts mid-air, catching a draft like it's inventing physics. You feel Apollo pause. This is, technically, a divine commute. He should be walking into Delphi with pomp and thunder. But instead, he lingers. There's a small ledge nearby. He sits. You sit too, a little ways off, because he is a god, and nobody wants to get accidentally vaporized by reflected sunlight. Now, a mainstream historical fact. Delphi was indeed considered the omphalos, the navel of the world. Pilgrims believed Apollo's energy radiated outward from this rocky outcrop like warmth from a hearth. And the sanctuary did once house a priestess who inhaled subterranean gases to reach her cryptic trances. Methane with a dash of prophecy. But back to Apollo. He leans back, eyes half-lidded, watching the swifts dart and dive. It's oddly calming. For a deity who literally powers the sun, you wouldn't expect such quiet focus. A breeze brushes the hem of his robe. The birds arc. Again, in perfect coordination. Nice formation, he mutters. Historians still argue whether Apollo's bird fixation appears in early cultic rituals or if it crept in later, absorbed from localized folk traditions. Either way, it begins here, in myth, if not in marble. He eventually stands, brushes non-existent dust from his immaculate shoulders. Right, he says, to no one in particular, and resumes his descent. You follow as he steps between gnarled olive trees, heading toward the stone terraces of Delphi. A few locals glance up, probably expecting something flashier, like thunder or golden chariots. Apollo pretends not to notice. As he reaches the outer temple courtyard, a pigeon struts across the path in front of him. Not urgently, more like it owns the place. Apollo stops again, stares. The pigeon does a little head bob routine, then flutters up to a column capital and watches him. And somehow, this ruffles Apollo's divine feathers more than any hostile titan ever did. He turns to the priestess, who has been waiting very patiently in a trance. "What's with all the birds?" he asks. She says something vague about omens. Birds always mean something in Greek lore. Flight direction, species, numbers. Are they flying east? West? Were they crows? Doves? In Homer, a single hawk could mean victory or doom, depending on whether it flapped its left wing or its right. But this is different. These birds aren't omens. They're just birds. And Apollo, for once, doesn't want a symbol. He wants a name. So you spend the rest of the afternoon following a literal god around Delphi as he pauses mid-conversation to peer up at various rooftops, points out nests in the eaves, and tries, rather endearingly, to mimic a mourning dove. You're vaguely aware that the sun's movement has slowed. The sky hangs in a golden pause. Somewhere, a goat bleats in slow motion. Time bends slightly to accommodate the fact that Apollo, master of daylight, is distracted by feathers. By the end of the day, you find yourself on a stone bench, leaning against a sun-warmed pillar. Apollo is still watching the birds. It's weirdly peaceful. The air smells like pine and bronze. You're vaguely sunburnt, and you don't care. Apollo stretches his arms above his head. I could do this for a century, he says. And honestly, you could too. It's early morning in Delphi again, although with Apollo in town, morning is more of a suggestion than a guarantee. You rise from your nap beneath the olive tree, stretch your arms, and realize Apollo's already halfway up the path to the temple, bow slung lazily over one shoulder and something like curiosity tugging at his brow. Today's agenda: officially claim the Oracle of Delphi, establish order, and maybe, just maybe, track down that pigeon from yesterday. He steps into the sacred grove near the Castalian Spring, a spot that's supposed to be all about ritual cleansing and solemn dedication. But his first words? Did anyone else see those doves fly in a perfect spiral yesterday? The priests freeze. One drops a ceremonial bowl. You wince in sympathy. Apollo, in true divine fashion, keeps going. They were symmetrical, like musical notation, except alive. You trail behind as he reaches the Omphalos stone, the legendary navel of the world. It's got carvings of twisted patterns, ancient geometries, and just a touch of moss. But Apollo isn't looking at the stone. He's watching something flutter behind a nearby cypress tree, a small bird. Not rare, just methodical. It lands, picks something from the ground, hops sideways, and glances at the god as if assessing his credentials. You hear Apollo exhale. Now, here's your mainstream historical nugget. In classical Greek augury, birds were the go-to divine communication tool. Before any big political move, wars, coronations, festivals, you consulted the birds. Priests called auspices read the sky like a script, interpreting patterns that, to the untrained eye, looked like avian nonsense. But in Greece, birds didn't just flap. They delivered mandates from the cosmos. Back in the myth, Apollo's not doing that. Not yet. This isn't augury. It's something more casual. You could even say cozy, which is deeply unsettling to the Delphic clergy. As Apollo heads to the inner sanctuary to assert his dominance, over the oracle, a few older priests shuffle behind a marble column and whisper nervously. He's talking to the birds again. They responded, Cleon. Don't be ridiculous. They nodded in time to his humming. Meanwhile, inside the temple, the Pythia, the priestess who serves as Apollo's mouthpiece, awaits in her sacred seat over the fissure, where she'll soon inhale hallucinogenic gases and say cryptic things in hexameter. It's a glamorous job. Apollo enters, glancing briefly at the floating vapors and high arches. Nice setup, he says. Then immediately gets distracted by the view out a nearby window, where two birds, sparrows, finches, are performing a gentle aerial duet over a fig tree. He leans toward you and mutters, Do you think they have names for each other? You try not to snort. A god musing about the social structures of sparrows. That's not in the Homeric hymns. And yet, there's a softness to this moment, a kind of divine boredom mixed with awe, like someone who's seen every fireworks show in the cosmos, but suddenly notices how intricate the stitching is on a butterfly's wing. Historians still argue whether these softer mythic moments, gods pausing to notice flowers, birds, or the way light falls, were later additions meant to humanize them for storytelling, or whether they reflect genuine theological nuance. Either way, you're witnessing something scholars would give their last terracotta jug to analyze. Back in the sanctuary, the Pythia takes her breath of holy vapors, trembles a little, and begins her utterance. He who seeks wisdom must walk where... But Apollo isn't listening. His gaze is still fixed on the window. The birds are back, circling gently, dancing almost. You swear you see a flash of iridescent green. Then one of the sparrows darts downward and lands on a stone sill. Apollo steps closer. Do you think they do this for fun, or are they following rules only they understand? He murmurs. You raise an eyebrow, but he doesn't see. He's too deep in thought, which is impressive, given the seismic effort the Pythia is putting into her trance just a few feet away. The priest beside you clears his throat. My lord, the oracle has spoken. Apollo waves vaguely. Tell her I'll circle back. You can see the panic blooming in the priest's face. You and Apollo step out into the courtyard, sunlight warming your skin like a weighted blanket. The birds are gone now, vanished into the cliffs, but their absence only makes Apollo more intrigued. You know, he says, there's a rhythm to the way they fly, not just random, like a song with no lyrics. I could write that. You nod slowly. You've already written songs about war, love, liars, prophecy, storms. Exactly, he says. Maybe it's time I write about something quieter. In that moment, the god of sunlight, medicine, archery, and artistic excellence looks more like a man watching backyard birds from a porch swing. His face softens, as if he's stepped into a thought no one else can reach. And just like that, you realize, this might be the beginning of something no one will record on temple walls or carve into stone. Not a legend, not a prophecy, just a fascination, an unintentional hobby that happens to belong to a being of cosmic importance. Apollo leans against a column. Anyway, he says, I should probably do something dramatic soon. Throw a thunderbolt, declare an era, that sort of thing. But he doesn't move. He's still watching the air. And you, sleepy traveller, in a world of gods, sit down beside him, because honestly, there's nowhere else you'd rather be. By day 3 of Apollo's totally accidental avian fascination, the priests of Delphi are quietly losing their collective marbles. You're sitting cross-legged on a temple step, sipping something that tastes like watered-down honey and regret, watching Apollo ignore all scheduled divine appointments. A Corinthian dignitary just arrived with 3 goats, 2 amphorae of wine, and an urgent request for prophetic guidance on a naval treaty. Apollo's response. Do you see that wren nesting in the fig tree? She just brought her mate a pebble. That's commitment. The dignitary blinks. You shrug. The goats bleat in confusion. At first, this was just a passing quirk, a curiosity. But now, it's full-blown. Apollo has started naming them. Not mythological names either. Mundane ones. Harold, Daphne, Bouncer. That one's a chubby jay who guards the grain storeroom roof like it's his turf. Apollo's companions, nymphs, muses, various glittery entourage members, try to redirect his attention with harp duets and interpretive dance, but he keeps peeking skyward. This morning, he even tried sketching one of the birds. The drawing was terrible. I'm more of a sculpture guy, he mumbled, but then tucked the parchment into his sash like it was precious. Now, here's your mainstream historical insight for the day. Apollo was associated with harmony, music, and the structured cosmos. In ancient Greek philosophy, particularly among the Pythagoreans, birdsong was sometimes considered an expression of cosmic order, a glimpse into the hidden patterns of the universe. So maybe, just maybe, there's precedent for this obsession. But honestly, you're starting to suspect it's something even simpler, that he's tired, not mortal tired, not I need a nap and a snack tired, but cosmically exhausted, the kind of weariness that comes from centuries of being the golden boy, deity, slaying monsters, healing the plague he accidentally started, falling in love with mortals who turn into trees. It's a lot. So watching birds, that's not escape, it's preservation. One of the younger priests cautiously approaches you during Apollo's mid-morning bird vigil. Is this normal? He asks, holding a scroll of unanswered petitions. Define normal, you reply. gesturing toward where Apollo is now whistling softly to a pair of nuthatches. Meanwhile, other myths start to shift around him. The oracles still function, but they're looser now, more poetic, less doom, more metaphor. One prophecy comes out as, "Let your sails mimic the sparrow's wing," which confuses a merchant so much he accidentally invents the curved rudder. Historians still debate whether Apollo's temple during this brief era experienced a shift in theological emphasis, less rigidity, more organic mystery. Some attribute it to syncretism with local nature cults. Others blame poor record-keeping, but the scrolls from this period are undeniably full of bird metaphors. Doves as diplomacy, finches as signs of fertility. Owls, of course, continue their long tradition of being the nerds of the bird world. One late afternoon, Apollo tries building a bird feeder. It's a disaster. He doesn't understand gravity very well. It's not usually his domain, so the feeder ends up suspended between two cypress trees by sunbeams. Yes, literal sunbeams. He weaves them like rope, humming as he works. You sit nearby, pretending not to watch. A robin tests the structure. It holds, sort of. Apollo beams like a child who just glued macaroni to a vase. Later, over dinner, which for you is stale barley and figs, he wonders aloud if birds ever get bored. Or are they always in the moment, he muses, just doing bird things, with no existential crises. You nod thoughtfully. They do have to worry about cats. Apollo sighs. Must be nice. Simplicity. And there it is again. That divine ache for something gentler than glory. That night, as stars shimmer overhead and the air grows cool, Apollo sits on a stone outcrop, one knee pulled up, his face in shadow. A nightjar trills in the distance, low and steady. He listens with the same intensity most people reserve for royal decrees. You lie back, feeling the stone's warmth fade under your shoulder blades. Somewhere in the dark, a small owl hoots, a single measured sound. The kind of noise that makes you think of libraries, secrets, and slightly judgmental. Professors. Apollo closes his eyes. She's telling me I'm ridiculous. She's not wrong. He chuckles, and the sound rolls across the hill like a lazy breeze. This, you think, is myth from the side door. Not the epic stuff, the bronze spears and raging seas, but the quiet corners, the in-between hours, the moments when even gods need a hobby. You glance over. Apollo is already asleep, one hand resting palm up beside him, the faintest shimmer of gold still glowing beneath his skin. The birds settle too, one by one, into nests, into the crooks of branches, into tiny spaces, between temple stones, and for a few hours the world forgets to be noisy. The next morning, Apollo wakes up before the birds do. You're startled to see him already perched on the edge of a marble column, legs dangling like some divine teenager skipping school. His gaze is trained skyward, watching the faint line of dawn stretch across the cliffs. There's something different in his posture today, not bored, not amused, intent. I've been thinking, he says, voice barely above a whisper. What if I could hear them more clearly? You blink. The birds? He nods, absently twirling a strand of laurel leaf between his fingers. Their rhythm, their calls, maybe vacuo. And here it is, the inevitable moment where a god's fascination tries to become a science. That's your mainstream fact for the day. Ancient Greeks did more than just interpret bird behavior symbolically. Aristotle, ever the overachiever, actually catalogued bird species and their habits in History of Animals. He even noticed migratory patterns and wrote about brood parasitism, though he was wildly wrong about swallows hibernating underwater. You can't win them all. Back to Apollo. He's made a decision. He's going to create a system, a divine index of bird calls. I'll call it aviometrics. You do not laugh. You do not blink. You nod with the gravitas of someone who once watched Dionysus name a wine jug Bartholomew. The first step? Listening. all day. Apollo begins pacing the sacred groves, the orchard behind the temple, even the coastal cliffs where seabirds scream existential nonsense into the wind. He tunes it all in, chirps, trills, caws, warbles, even those strange two-note hoots from the olive-thieving starlings. To help him focus, he summons a small golden orb that hovers above his palm and glows softly whenever a new bird enters the area. You name it the feather finder. He hates that name. You keep using it. Soon, he's scribbling on wax tablets, marking notations for pitch, rhythm, movement. You peer over his shoulder one afternoon and notice he's mapped a pattern of wren calls into something that looks suspiciously like musical scales. Birds follow tonal modes, he wonders aloud. Are they natural Dorian composers? Around Delphi, rumours start to swirl. Pilgrims now bring bird-themed offerings. A baker arrives with finch-shaped bread. A fisherman donates a cage of canaries, which promptly escape and make a home in the temple's rafters. One elderly woman insists her late husband was reincarnated as a pigeon and asks Apollo to pass along a message. He does, solemnly, with impeccable pigeon mimicry. One afternoon, Apollo tries recording birdsong using a hollowed-out tortoise shell, goat gut strings, and what can only be described as mystical whistling. It sounds almost intentional. You suspect this may be the accidental birth of a primitive bird call flute. He calls it the lyriphonos. You suggest adding holes to vary the pitch. He raises an eyebrow. Should I credit you on the temple inscription? You already named it in Greek. I'm good. Historians still argue whether the lyriphonos was ever real, or if it's just a symbolic origin for a later style of pastoral flute. But fragments of pottery from the region do depict gods and birds in musical standoffs, so someone, somewhere, took the idea seriously. You pause now, under a blossoming fig tree as the sun softens. Apollo is nearby, flat on his back, staring up at the feathered canopy above. A blue tit lands on his chest, fluffs its wings, and lets out a chirp that sounds almost melodic. Apollo whispers, "They know I'm listening now." And for the first time in days, you believe him. Because the birds aren't just acting like birds anymore. They've started lingering, repeating patterns, landing where he walks. One seagull even strutted into the temple and refused to leave until Apollo hummed it a tune. You lie beside him, staring at the sky, letting the bird calls layer over each other. High notes, low notes. That strange wheeze one of them makes that sounds like a hiccup inside a question mark. Is it music? He asks. Isn't everything, you reply, and he smiles. You're deep into the 6th week of Apollo's feathery fixation when it happens. The first performance. Not by humans. Don't get ahead of yourself. The birds, obviously. It begins subtly, as most divine nonsense does. One morning, the grove is unusually quiet. No chirps, no fluttering, not even the usual squabble over that one prized olive branch. You find Apollo standing still, eyes closed, hands relaxed at his sides like he's listening to something deeper than sound. Then, one by one, they arrive. First, a trio of swallows dart overhead in perfect synchrony, not their usual erratic darting, but an elegant figure-8 pattern. Then, a mourning dove perches on the temple's pediment and coos in triple time. A chorus of sparrows gathers on the columns like a feathered amphitheatre. You glance at Apollo. His lips are parted, his pupils dilated. They've composed something, he breathes. Or, we've just learned how to hear it. The temple staff gathers, hesitant. A few pilgrims stop mid-prayer. Even the goats, who've become unofficial mascots at this point, pause chewing. And then, the starlings. A murmuration spirals in, sweeping across the sky in an undulating wave. They form shapes, arrows, circles, something that briefly resembles a lyre. The air is filled with the soft rush of wing beats and occasional indignant squawks. Apollo raises a hand, not to conduct, but as if in greeting. The starlings spin one final loop then scatter into the distant light like notes returning to the page. It's oddly moving. Here's your mainstream historical nugget. The ancient Greeks did actually associate starlings and other birds with omens, especially during the practice of ornithomancy, or divination by bird movement. But this isn't just about interpreting the birds. It's collaboration, something far stranger. Now for your fringe fact. In an obscure fragment from a pre-Socratic philosopher, possibly Pherecydes, possibly someone who fell into a vat of honey wine, there's mention of a sky script made not of stars, but birds. A language formed from their flight patterns, readable only by gods and those who dared look sideways at the heavens. You suspect that's where Apollo is headed. In the days that follow, he becomes quieter, not somber, just focused. His sketches of birds now include loops and trails of motion, curved lines showing where a sparrow turned mid-air, or where a gull hesitated before landing. "You're reading them," you say one afternoon, catching him tracing the same curve over and over. He nods, trying to. It's like wind grammar. Meanwhile, the priests at Delphi are in mild revolt. The oracles are still functioning, but the answers are increasingly metaphorical. One poor merchant received a prophecy that read, "Like the heron among reeds, lift your feet when the moon winks." He burst into tears and cancelled his wine shipment to Thebes. There's an emergency meeting of the priesthood. You're invited only because Apollo insists you're his field assistant. You try not to snort at the title. In the meeting hall, arguments bounce like pebbles in a bronze pan. This is unprecedented. We are a temple, not an aviary. Someone needs to clean the altars. There's guano in the offering bowls. But then, one old priest, bearded, stooped, and generally considered half-dreaming at the best of times, says, "Perhaps this is the new order. The god evolves, shouldn't we?" Silence. Even the birds outside pause. Later that evening, you sit beside Apollo near a little stream. He's carving something into the soft bark of a willow, a spiral, a shape that mimics the curve of a hawk's dive. "Do you think they're teaching me?" he muses, "or remembering through me?" You tilt your head. "Birds with memory." He shrugs. "Some of them navigate the same routes across oceans every year. That's better than half the mortals I've met." You admit, fair point. Now, a question historians still argue over, was this period of Apollo's, let's call it avian intermission, part of a deliberate shift in the temple's function, or merely a mythologized blip? Some say the bird motifs found in later Delphic carvings are proof of lasting influence. Others dismiss them as local artisans being quirky with their iconography. You, however, were there. And you remember this next bit quite clearly. Apollo, rising at dawn, eyes glowing faintly. Gold, whistling a low four-note melody, and the birds answering. Not just mimicking, responding, echoing a theme, developing it. A call and response with the sky. The song, whatever it meant, lasted 12 days. On the 12th, Apollo went silent again. Not sad, not distracted. Still. "You done?" you asked, wiping pigeon feather from your shoulder. "For now," he said. "They'll take it from here." And somehow you knew that was true, because even as Apollo returned to his lyre and his prophecies and his golden glow, the birds continued, not showy, just present, singing softer, maybe, but singing still. You're in Thebes now, not by choice. Apollo, feeling restless after his avian sabbatical, declares he needs a change of scenery. And apparently you are part of the carry-on luggage. It's early morning, dew still clinging to the olive, trees, when he snaps his fingers and transports you both halfway across the Peloponnese without so much as a breakfast fig. You land in Thebes in a flash of light, mild nausea, and a whiff of laurel. Thebes is buzzing. Always is. But it's not war or trade this time. It's fashion. Feather fashion. Apparently, word of Apollo's bird-watching spread faster than a kestrel on tailwind. Thebes, known for its textiles and theatrical flair, has embraced the trend with truly chaotic enthusiasm. Bird motifs are everywhere, painted on vases, stitched into tunics, even woven into wreaths that make the wearer look like they lost a fight with a decorative chicken. Apollo is delighted. "Look," he whispers, nudging you toward a market stall. "Pigeon-themed sandals." You are less delighted, especially when a poet recites a 30-stanza ode comparing Apollo's golden hair to the radiant neck plumes of a peacock. He claps. You stare into the sun, reconsidering mortality. But let's give the city credit. They've tapped into something. Not just trendy aesthetics, an actual curiosity about birds. There are scrolls being written about their nesting habits, murals of ibis migrations, even a symposium debating whether storks symbolize renewal or just long legs and excellent posture. Mainstream historical aside, in classical Greece, birds weren't just symbols or messengers. They often represented civic ideals. The owl, for example, was not just Athena's mascot. It became a kind of shorthand for wisdom, prudence, and taxation systems, really. Thebes, ever eager to distinguish itself from Athens, may have decided birds were their next civic personality. Back to you and Apollo. You're being followed. At first, it's subtle. A rustle in the sycamores. A blur of motion from rooftop to rooftop. Then, on the third day, you catch it clearly. A young boy, maybe 10, draped in feathers, clutching a slate. He vanishes before you can speak, but reappears later that evening near the agora. "Why are you spying on us?" you ask. He shrugs. "You're the bird god's helper." Apollo preens. The boy, whose name is Iphi, is an orphan. Typical origin story for kids who roam mythic cities unbothered. He's been watching birds since he was small and claims he's learned to talk to them. "You mean you mimic them?" you ask. "No," he replies seriously. "They tell me things." And then he says something that shouldn't be possible. He recounts the pattern of a hawk's flight the previous morning. The hawk that passed over you and Apollo outside the bathhouse. You hadn't noticed anyone else there, but the description is perfect. Even the little hiccup dip the bird made mid-air. Apollo stares at him like he's just met his first competitor in centuries. From then on, Iphi is your shadow. He leads you through back alleys where pigeons gather unnaturally in circles, to roof tiles where finches form synchronized clusters, to abandoned towers where nightingales practice what sounds suspiciously like scales. Apollo is half intrigued, half jealous. And here comes your fringe tidbit. Some fragments from the lost Orphic hymns refer to sky children who hear what the winds forget. Most scholars think it's just lyrical fluff, but in this moment, watching Effie coax a magpie into trading shiny pebbles for breadcrumbs, you begin to wonder. The boy becomes something of a mascot for your journey. He draws maps showing where different species congregate. He tells you which birds speak in riddles, the crows, and which just want gossip, obviously, the jays. Apollo, meanwhile, keeps trying to one-up him. One day, the god builds a floating perch that tracks migratory birds in real time. The next, he composes a new hymn meant to mimic dawn chorus birdsong. It causes 6 street cats to fall asleep instantly, and 1 philosopher to sob into a basket of oranges. But despite all the celestial flair, it's Effie who gets the last word. One afternoon, he leads you both to the edge of town, up a grassy hill overlooking the plains. He says he's found a listening place. You sit in silence. Birds gather, not a swarm, not a murmur, just gentle presence. Soft wings, curious eyes. Then, Effie speaks a single word. You don't recognize it. It's not Greek, not even something you can trace to any dialect you know. It sounds like wind passing through feathers. And the birds respond, not dramatically. No storm of feathers or coordinated pirouettes, just alignment, stillness, a pause that feels cosmic. Apollo, stunned, doesn't speak for a long time. Finally, he whispers, "What was that?" Effie shrugs. just something they taught me. Historians still argue whether child seers like Efi existed outside myth. Some say they're purely symbolic figures representing innocence and animal intuition. Others point to scattered inscriptions about temple assistants who spoke in winged tongues. All you know is that after that moment, Apollo treats Efi not like a follower, but a peer. That night, the three of you sit beneath a fig tree. Apollo plays a soft tune on the lyriphonos. Efi hums along, inventing words as he goes. The birds listen. And you? You finally exhale. You realize you've stopped trying to make sense of it. Maybe this isn't science, or religion, or even prophecy. Maybe it's just listening. You've left Thebes now, reluctantly. Even Apollo, glittery and divine though he is, muttered something about needing a less fashionable climate. And so you wander northward, tracing lazy mountain paths until the land flattens into rolling. Hills, olive groves, and sleepy hamlets that still think Hermes invented thunder. Your destination. A village with no name, nestled somewhere between Thessaly and not quite anywhere. You're here because, according to a surprisingly well-informed turtle who wandered into Delphi weeks ago, don't ask. This is the seasonal meeting ground for something Apollo has taken to calling the feathered conclave. You arrive at dawn. There's no sign, no procession, just birds, everywhere. Not a dramatic Hitchcockian horror sort of everywhere. No, these birds are oddly polite. A line of doves wait to bathe in a stream. A cluster of crows debate over a fig. One particularly enterprising woodpecker taps rhythmically on a hollow log, creating the closest thing you've ever heard to bird jazz. Apollo is elated. This, he says, gesturing wide with both hands, is the future of divine communication. You're still groggy from a poor night's sleep on a very judgmental patch of moss. You mean Birdtown? He sighs patiently. I mean a place where song is not performance, but parliament. And he's right. Sort of. Because what happens over the next several days is weirdly structured. Birds arrive from all over the known world. Egyptian ibises with glossy feathers, Indian peafowl that strut like theatre kids, even a puffin, who's clearly gotten very lost. They settle into makeshift perches, trees, fence posts, the top of your head, just once, and no, you haven't forgiven the stork. And then, each dawn, they begin. It's not music exactly, it's not language either, but it's something. Chirps and clicks, long warbles and sharp trills arranged in patterns. The air becomes thick with layered sound, like 1,000 soloists trying very hard not to harmonize. Apollo listens intently, sometimes sketching what you assume are musical notations, other times simply closing his eyes and nodding along. And here's the historical grounding. In many ancient traditions, Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and yes, Greek, birds were believed to carry divine messages. But the Greeks took it a step further with augury, a formal practice of divining the gods' will through bird flight. What you're witnessing now feels like augury's chaotic musical cousin. On the third morning, something strange happens. A council of corvids, ravens, jackdaws, crows begin mimicking human speech. Not full sentences, just fragments. You hear things like golden lyre, sea foam, where is Demeter? And unsettlingly, he watches through the pines. Apollo is intrigued. They're building context, he says. You raise an eyebrow. They're creeping me out. He waves a hand. Ravens always sound ominous. It's part of their aesthetic. Fringe fact for the day. Some records from ancient Epirus mention ravens being kept in temple courtyards and trained to repeat key phrases. Supposedly, one such bird once announced a priest's death 3 days before it happened. Most scholars chalk it up to retroactive superstition. You, after hearing "You Dream of Feathers" in a disturbingly accurate imitation of your voice, aren't so sure. On the fourth night, the conclave changes tone. The birds grow silent. One by one, they stop singing and simply watch. Eyes glinting in the moonlight. Feathers still. Apollo stands in the center of the grove, arms wide. He doesn't speak. Instead, he begins to hum, a low rolling tone that vibrates through the soil. Then, from the darkness, steps a figure. Not a god, not a mortal, a woman made entirely of feathers. Her form shifts slightly in the wind. Not illusion, more like suggestion. Her voice, when she speaks, is the sound of wings brushing against sky. "You hear them," she says to Apollo. "I try to," he replies. She turns her head, bird-like. "And you would teach others?" "If they'll listen." She studies you, her eyes catching candlelight and starlight all at once. "Most don't. They ask only to be heard." Now here's where scholars still argue, because there is a minor deity in obscure texts called Chionopolis, the Lady of Winged Echoes, who is said to have taught mortals how to read windsong and cloud shadow. Some claim she's an invention of late-era mystics. Others suggest she predates even the Olympians. Whether she's myth or memory, she kneels before Apollo, touches his chest, and whispers, "Remember the pulse beneath the feather," then vanishes. Apollo doesn't speak for a full day after. Neither do the birds. When they do sing again, it's different. Softer. No less complex, but more attuned. As if something sacred passed between them all in that moment. And you? You lie beneath an elm, trying to sleep, hearing the lull of feathered diplomacy all around you. You're not sure what just happened, or why, or if you imagined half of it, but you do feel different, calmer, quieter somehow, which in this story counts as progress. You're walking again, not by choice, mind you. Apollo has declared it's time to return to civilization, though his idea of civilization involves a mountaintop retreat with 3 peacocks, a personal lyre polisher, and a nightly fog machine made from sea mist. So, back up the craggy slopes you go. Your destination is Mount Helicon, sacred to the Muses, and therefore, according to Apollo, the ideal place to workshop his bird speech symphony. Yes, he's composing. Again. And yes, it's being called Song of Beak and Sky. You're trying not to roll your eyes. Still, Helicon is lovely. It smells of pine, thyme, and just a hint of narcissism. The views are absurd. Blue valleys stretching into infinity, clouds curling like whipped cream on the horizon. It's also completely overrun with nightingales. Like you can't hear yourself think over the trilling. Apollo is thrilled. "Ah, a chorus of dreamsmiths," he sighs. "You mostly just want earplugs." The Muses don't seem to mind though. They emerge from their various poetry nooks and dance clearings to greet Apollo like an old friend who never remembers birthdays, but always brings good wine. You meet Calliope first. She's writing a tragic ballad about a man who fell in love with his own shadow. She seems distracted. "Tell me," she says, brushing ink off her hands, "can owls experience longing?" Apollo nods solemnly. They invented longing. And now for your historical anchor. In ancient Greece, Mount Helicon was a literal and poetic symbol of artistic inspiration. The Muses, daughters of Mnemosyne, memory, and Zeus, were invoked by every serious poet and musician. Even Homer opened his epics with a plea to the muse. So yes, this is where stories are born, polished, and occasionally sung too loud under a full moon. Your fringe fact: a few ancient texts mention a secret 9th muse, sometimes described as having wings, and whose domain was silence. Most consider it metaphorical, but in this narrative, she might be very real. Your days settle into a rhythm, if you can call Apollo's schedule rhythmic. Mornings are for composing, afternoons for bird consultations. Yes, he now holds actual Q&As with sparrows. And evenings for dramatic recitals that involve lots of wrist flourishes and glowing eyes. You become his reluctant assistant. You hold scrolls. You hum harmonies. You once have to chase a magpie who made off with an entire stanza. One night, while gathering pine cones for what Apollo calls atmospheric percussion, you hear something strange. Not birdsong, not muses, not Apollo rehearsing his falsetto. It's silence. Heavy, deliberate, humming with intent. You follow it. Deep into the forest, beyond the clearings where songs live, beyond the paths where even goats hesitate. And there, perched on a stone older than Athens, you find her, the winged woman again. But she's different now, dimmer, like moonlight through smoke. Why did you follow? She asks, though her beak doesn't move. You try to answer, but nothing comes, not even a whisper. She steps closer. You feel warmth, not heat, but something ancient and kind. The birds are not the message, she says softly. They are the reminder. You nod, though you're not sure what you're agreeing to. And then she vanishes. Again. When you return, Apollo is waiting. He doesn't ask where you went. He just hands you a lyre, wordlessly. For once, you don't protest. You strum. It's clumsy, but honest. And Apollo, surprisingly, smiles. I think you're ready, he says. For what? To listen without hearing. Cryptic. But then again, this is a god who once tried to explain time using olive oil metaphors. Later that week, the Muses gather for a special performance. Apollo insists on premiering Song of Beacon Sky in full, and the birds are seated, yes, seated, in tiny arranged rows. A woodpecker has a front row cushion. The pelican brought snacks. The piece is, well, let's call it eclectically structured. It has moments of genuine beauty, soft, echoing notes that mimic sunrise, trills that imitate the rustle of feathers mid-flight. There are also confusing bits, like the extended duck solo. Still, when it ends, the birds erupt in song. Not applause, obviously, but a wave of harmonious response that fills the mountain, bouncing from tree to tree until even the rocks seem to hum. Apollo bows. Twice. Possibly 3 times. Calliope raises an eyebrow. It's ambitious, she says. Clio adds, certainly, bird adjacent. You? You just smile. Because for all its divine ridiculousness, the song worked. It bridged something. And that's the moment you realize Apollo didn't invent birdwatching. He just paid attention and inspired others to do the same. As the stars rise over Mount Helicon, you lie back in the grass, birds settling in nearby trees, the echo of a god's laughter mingling with crickets. You're not sure what comes next, but for now, you're content to just be still, to just listen. You wake slowly, still tangled in a drowsy haze, as the first tendrils of dawn creep over the mountain ridge. The birds are already stirring. Soft chirps and rustles, mixing with the faint murmur of a nearby stream. You breathe in the cool, pine-scented air, feeling the rough bark of the elm tree you've chosen as your morning perch. Apollo is already up, tuning his lyre with that characteristic furrowed brow. You suspect he's trying to get it just right, though the last 5 tunings sounded identical to your admittedly untrained ears. He catches your eye and grins. Ready for the next lesson? You nod, blinking away sleep. Today's focus is something Apollo calls winged rhythms. He explains that birds don't just sing randomly. They follow subtle patterns that mirror the cycles of nature. Sunrise and sunset, the passing seasons, even the phases of the moon. He insists that understanding these patterns is like unlocking a secret code, one that reveals a kind of cosmic order. You listen as he points out a nearby nightingale, tracing the rise and fall of its melody. It's gentle, almost hypnotic, a kind of lullaby that the Greeks say can calm the soul. Here's a little-known fact. Ancient Greeks believed that nightingales were once human, transformed by the gods after tragic love stories. They were symbols of both sorrow and inspiration, and poets often invoked their song as a muse for melancholic verses. So every trill you hear now feels like a whisper from a forgotten romance. As you watch, Apollo begins to mimic the bird's calls, his voice wavering between a deep hum and a high-pitched warble. It's surprisingly convincing, and for a moment, you almost forget he's a god rather than a very enthusiastic musician with a flair for theatrics. But the deeper lesson is in the pauses. those tiny silences between notes that carry as much meaning as the sounds themselves. Apollo explains that these spaces allow the listener's mind to wander, to imagine, to dream. You realize this is exactly what you've been needing. Not just the bird songs, but the quiet moments they create. The forest around you responds too. A gentle breeze stirs leaves, insects buzz lazily, and somewhere overhead, a lone owl begins its soft call, a reminder that night and day dance together in endless rhythm. Here's where things get quirky. Some scholars argue whether birds really intend to communicate with each other through these songs, or if it's mostly about territorial claims and mating calls. Apollo naturally leans toward the poetic interpretation, but even he concedes. It's a mystery wrapped in feathers. You smile to yourself. Mysteries are good company for late-night thoughts. By mid-afternoon, you and Apollo find a quiet clearing where the birds seem to relax, gathering in loose clusters like an open-air salon. You watch a pair of sparrows share a meal, their tiny beaks delicately passing crumbs back and forth. It's an oddly intimate scene, almost like a small celebration of companionship. Apollo chuckles. Even the gods could learn a thing or two about friendship here. You nod, feeling the warmth of the sun on your skin and the gentle hum of life all around. As evening falls, you realize you're no longer just observing. You're part of this quiet world. The rhythm of bird songs, the pulse of wind through leaves, the soft shimmer of twilight settling over the hills. It's a peace you didn't know you were searching for. And somewhere deep inside, you understand that this gentle interplay of sound and silence, flight and stillness, is exactly what Apollo was trying to share all along. The days on Mount Helicon flow together like soft feathers on a breeze, and you're beginning to forget what time feels like outside this quiet kingdom of birds and gods. It's a curious sensation, both soothing and unsettling, this slow unwinding of hours without the usual rush of mortal worries. Apollo, ever restless, wakes you before dawn, eager to try something new. Bird meditation. You're skeptical. Is this going to involve sitting cross-legged while a chorus of warblers sings your worries away? That sounds suspiciously like a nature-themed lullaby commercial. But you comply, settling on a mossy patch as Apollo instructs you to close your eyes and listen beyond the song. At first, it's tricky. Your mind wanders to grocery lists and the odd question of whether ancient Greeks ever complained about bad coffee. But gradually, you begin to notice the subtle layers beneath the birdsong. The soft rustle of feathers, the distant crackle of twigs, the faint heartbeat of the earth itself. Apollo whispers, birds don't just sing to be heard, they sing to be felt. There's a fringe theory here. Some scholars propose that ancient cultures believed birds could sense invisible energies, acting as messengers not just between gods and humans, but between the physical and spiritual worlds. Whether that's poetic metaphor or actual belief, you find yourself drawn into the mystery. You open your eyes after what feels like minutes, but might be hours. Around you, the birds are unusually still, as if respecting your new reverence. Later, Apollo challenges you to identify individual bird calls, a game that feels part scavenger hunt, part memory test. You fumble at first, mixing up a thrush for a robin, but Apollo's patient, offering clues that sound suspiciously like riddles. Listen for the one that sounds like laughter trapped in leaves. Find the call that echoes moonlight. You try to decode the forest's language, and though you only catch fragments, it feels like progress. You learn that ancient Greeks often associated certain birds with specific gods, owls with Athena, swans with Apollo himself, and cranes with the underworld. These symbolic meanings add layers to every chirp and flutter you hear, weaving myth into nature. By dusk, you're exhausted in a satisfying way, the kind of tired that comes from truly paying attention. Apollo smiles, strumming a gentle tune on his lyre. You're becoming quite the bird whisperer. You laugh softly, more like bird, eavesdropper. He raises an eyebrow. There's an art to both. As night falls, you notice the stars twinkling with a new brightness, as if the birds have carried a message upward to the heavens. You wonder what other secrets flutter just beyond your reach. And you're okay with not knowing. Because some mysteries, you realize, are best savored like a soft song carried on the wind. The next morning greets you with the scent of damp earth and the quiet chatter of waking birds. Apollo has a new plan, a bird census of sorts. He wants to catalogue every species on Helicon, though you suspect his real goal is an excuse to wander the woods without anyone asking questions. You follow him through dappled sunlight and shadow, counting the fluttering forms that flash between branches and bushes. There are finches with fiery chests, doves cooing like distant lullabies, and woodpeckers tapping a steady rhythm that seems to echo your own heartbeat. Apollo stops beside an ancient oak, pulling out a small, leather-bound notebook. "We'll call this the Helicon Avian Ledger," he says proudly. You jot down the names and behaviors, even though some birds sound suspiciously like one another. Historians still argue whether early Greeks kept formal records of birds, or if their knowledge was mostly oral and symbolic, stories passed down like whispered secrets. As you watch, a curious sight unfolds. A small bird with iridescent feathers performs an elaborate dance, hopping and spinning, with what looks like genuine enthusiasm. Apollo watches intently. "That's the sunbird of Helicon," he murmurs. Known for its courtship displays that could rival even the most dramatic muses, you're struck by the vivid colours, almost jewel-like, gleaming in the filtered sunlight. It's a reminder that even in the ancient world, nature staged performances as captivating as any human drama. The bird's dance shifts your thoughts to another curious detail. In some Greek myths, birds were believed to be transformed souls, a way for gods to communicate messages from the beyond. Apollo breaks your reverie with a teasing grin. "Ready for the next part? We're going to attempt bird language." You raise an eyebrow. "Is that a thing?" "Of course," he insists, plucking a reed from nearby. "Or at least, it will be." He demonstrates by mimicking a series of whistles and clicks, urging you to respond in kind. It feels ridiculous, like an awkward game of charades played with invisible clues. But you're surprisingly good at it. Or maybe the birds are, just patient. Later, as you sit beneath the oak's wide branches, you realize that this isn't just a game. It's a form of connection, a bridge built from curiosity and respect. And in the quiet company of Helicon's birds, you find a new kind of friendship. You awaken to a soft drizzle, the kind of rain that seems more like a whisper than a storm. The forest smells richer, the ground damp and alive. Apollo declares it a perfect day for quiet observation, which means you'll be seated in the shade, cloaked in patience. As you settle beneath a willow, you notice how the birds change their songs with the weather, their melodies softening, sometimes halting to listen for distant sounds muffled by the rain. The gentle patter on leaves creates a soothing rhythm that feels like nature's own lullaby. Ancient Greeks believed rain could cleanse not just the earth, but also the soul. A refreshing thought as you let the mist cool your skin. You catch sight of a peculiar bird with a bright crest bobbing through the underbrush. Apollo whispers, "That's a hoopoe, known for its crown-like feathers and mysterious habits." He explains that hoopos were often seen as messengers between worlds, carrying wisdom and sometimes warning of change. There's a quirky note here. Some ancient texts describe hoopos as having healing powers, particularly in protecting crops from pests. As the rain eases, you and Apollo take a slow stroll along a mossy path lined with wildflowers, the earth fragrant and soft underfoot. You find yourself paying attention to the small details, the shimmer of a beetle's shell, the way droplets cling to spider webs like tiny jewels. Apollo hums a tune that sounds suspiciously like the rhythm of raindrops on stone, and you can't help but smile. Historians still argue whether the Greeks' fascination with birds was purely symbolic, or if it reflected a deeper, almost scientific interest in natural behavior. You notice a flash of white feathers overhead, a dove gliding silently between branches. It's a quiet moment, but it feels full of meaning, as if the bird carries a gentle message of peace and calm. By the time you return to the clearing, the sky has cleared, and the forest is alive with fresh light and song. You realize that days like this, slow, wet, and full of quiet marvels, are exactly what make this journey unforgettable. The light is fading now, softer and warmer, as you and Apollo settle near a bubbling brook that twists through the forest like a silver ribbon. The air carries the scent of wet stones and wild thyme, mixing with the faint hum of insects winding down for the evening. Apollo strums his lyre quietly, the notes blending with the gentle rush of water and distant bird calls. You lean back against a smooth rock, feeling the coolness seep through your clothing, grounding you in the moment. Tonight's lesson is about birds and dreams, the mysterious ways these creatures have inspired human imagination through the ages. Apollo tells you that in some myths, birds are the guardians of sleep, carrying messages between waking and dreaming worlds. You learn that the Greeks believed the soul could transform into a bird during sleep, soaring free from the body's confines. It's a comforting image that somewhere inside you is a feathered self, drifting through silent skies. A quirky detail catches your attention. Some scholars suggest the Greeks associated certain birds with different types of dreams. Owls, for example, were linked to wisdom and prophecy, while nightingales were thought to sing only to those with poetic souls. Apollo pauses his music and points to the sky, where a flock of swallows swoops low, their movements smooth and graceful. He whispers, "Swallows were seen as bringers of good luck, especially to travelers and lovers." There's a playful debate among historians about whether these dream-related bird myths were meant literally or as metaphors for the creative mind. Apollo smiles knowingly, never committing fully to one side. As night deepens, you close your eyes and let the sounds wash over you, the lyre, the brook, the distant wing beats. Your thoughts grow quiet, drifting like leaves on a gentle current. You wonder what dreams the birds themselves might have, hidden behind their bright eyes and swift wings, and with that thought, you begin to slip toward your own peaceful sleep. The dawn breaks gently, spilling soft gold across the forest floor and setting the leaves aglow. You rise slowly, your limbs still heavy from yesterday's peaceful journey into dreams. Apollo is already awake, humming a new melody that seems to echo the freshness of morning. Today's lesson is something you didn't expect: bird-inspired inventions in ancient Greece. Apollo, with a mischievous smile, claims that the god of music and prophecy also dabbled in early engineering, though his inventions rarely worked on the first try. You follow him to a clearing where he unveils a curious contraption made of twigs, feathers, and bits of bronze. It's supposed to mimic the flapping of wings, an attempt at human flight inspired by the birds you've spent so much time watching. You can't help but chuckle. "You're serious about this?" "Completely," he replies, grinning. "Imagine if humans could glide through the sky like swallows. The possibilities." It turns out that the legend of Daedalus, the master craftsman, who built wings for himself and his son Icarus, echoes this dream of flight. Though Apollo's invention is more poetic than practical, it connects you to the timeless human fascination with birds and the sky. You also learn about the use of bird feathers in ancient armor and clothing, not just for decoration, but believed to bring speed and protection. Soldiers wore them hoping to channel the bird's swiftness in battle, a blend of myth and practicality. A quirky fact surfaces. Some ancient Greeks believed that wearing certain feathers could protect against evil spirits or bad luck, turning fashion into a kind of spiritual armor. Apollo encourages you to think about how birds have inspired humans in so many ways, from art and music to technology and belief. It's a reminder that the line between myth and reality is often as thin as a feather's edge. Historians still debate whether these stories of flight attempts were purely myth or based on early experiments. You look up at the sky, imagining what it might feel like to soar alongside the swallows, carried by the wind and the soft hum of wings. For now, you settle back on the soft grass, content to watch and dream. The final day on Mount Helicon unfolds with a quiet reverence. The sun hangs low, bathing the forest in honeyed light that softens every leaf and branch. You and Apollo sit side by side on a weathered stone bench, listening to the distant chorus of birds settling in for the night. You feel a gentle sadness mingled with gratitude. This peaceful place has become a refuge, a space where time moves differently and stories take flight on feathered wings. Apollo begins to hum a familiar tune, the same one that welcomed you on your first morning. It's a soothing melody, simple and steady, like the heartbeat of the forest itself. As the light fades, you reflect on everything you've learned, the curious habits of birds, the myths woven around their songs, the ways they inspired humans to dream and create. There's comfort in knowing that some mysteries remain unsolved, that not every bird's call has a clear meaning, and not every story has a neat ending. The unknown invites your imagination to wander freely, like a bird on the wind. Apollo's voice lowers to a whisper as he shares one last thought. Perhaps the greatest gift of birds is their reminder that beauty often lies in the simple, the slow, the overlooked. You nod, feeling your eyelids grow heavy. The forest seems to sigh in agreement, a final lullaby from your feathered friends. As night fully descends, the stars blink awake, and the gentle hum of nature becomes your cradle. You settle deeper into the stone bench, the cool air wrapping around you like a soft shawl. And with one last look at the sky, you let go, drifting into a calm, peaceful sleep, carried gently by the wings of myth and memory. Slowly, your breathing deepens, and your thoughts soften like feathers settling on the forest floor. The world quiets, the sharp edges of wakefulness smoothing into gentle curves. Imagine the soft flutter of wings above you, each beat a tender rhythm that eases your mind, guiding you toward rest. Let the fading light of Helicon wash over your thoughts, carrying away the day's concerns and inviting dreams woven from ancient songs and whispered secrets. Here, in this timeless place, you are safe, cradled by stories that have traveled through centuries just to comfort you tonight. Let your spirit rise and float on the serene breeze, drifting beyond time and space until the morning sun finds you renewed and calm. Good night, and may your dreams be as light and free as the birds you've come to know.